Coming up on today's early edition at 6, a day after the government announces plans to hike cigarette prices, a Seoul court begins hearing a $52 million lawsuit against the nation's top 3 tobacco companies. Korea's central bank keeps the nation's key interest rate steady at 2.25% following a rate cut last month, but pundits say another cut might be coming soon. Plus, in the Middle East, after much discussion, 10 key Arab states commit to the U.S.-led effort to fight Islamic State militants. Stay tuned for these stories and more on Early Edition at 6. It's 6 p.m. on Friday, September 12th, here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. We begin with the latest on the $52 million lawsuit brought against the nation's biggest tobacco companies.
The trial began this Friday, one day after the government announced plans to nearly double cigarette prices. Our Shin Se-min starts us off.
The trial of the National Health Insurance Service versus the nation's largest tobacco manufacturers is currently underway, one day after the government announced plans to nearly double cigarette prices starting next year. The public organization is seeking compensation from KT&G Corporation, Philip Morris Korea, and British American Tobacco Korea to recover medical costs incurred due to what the agency claims are tobacco-related disease such as lung cancer. The organization is confident they can prove the causal relationship between smoking and the illnesses using 19 years of medical records in its database. The agency says the data will prove that the occurrence of cancer in smokers is much higher than in non-smokers. It also aims to show that the tobacco companies violated laws in failing to fully explain the addictive and hazardous chemicals that are present in their products. The tobacco companies in defense are expected to argue that they can't be held responsible for the choices of individuals to smoke or not smoke, and that they have done what was legally required of them to warn the public about the dangers of smoking. It's a $52 million lawsuit that could open the floodgates for similar suits if the National Health Insurance Service wins. It would also signify a rare loss for Big Tobacco, which successfully defended itself earlier this year against 7 individual plaintiffs who were seeking compensation over claims that will resemble the ones in this trial. The public agency, however, feels that its case is much stronger. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, first came the cigarettes, and now taxes on automobiles and homes may be next in line. If the government has its way, taxes on those 3 will go up in the near future.
And conspiracy theories grow. It's raising concerns about the effects on the average consumer and questions about the government's true intentions. Our Song Ji-sun has this report.
One day after the health ministry announced plans to nearly double cigarette prices, the Ministry of Security and Public Administration announced its plan to double automobile and residence taxes over the next 3 years, noting that's been fixed for 2 decades and needs to be adjusted to reflect current circumstances. The move would certainly lend a helping hand to local governments who are suffering from fiscal deficits, with the nation collecting just 45% of targeted tax revenue in the first half. Like the proposed hike in cigarette prices, the changes to the automobile and residence tax code will first have to be approved by the National Assembly before going into effect. They'll also have to sway public opinion. If the legislation takes effect as initially proposed, over 70% of the price for a pack of cigarettes would be in taxes. The cigarette price hike is expected to raise consumer prices up by 0.6 percentage points. Under the assumption that consumer prices will rise by 3% each year, the Korea Institute of Public Finance says the price for a pack of cigarettes would be double what it is now in 5 years' time. If the changes take effect, the government will rake in an estimated $2.7 billion in additional taxes. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan said Thursday that the additional tax revenue would go toward bolstering the nation's safety and health infrastructure. But the ministry's tax department chief admitted to reporters on Friday That latest series of tax hike proposals have a number of purposes, one of them being to raise tax revenue. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, those measures can only take effect if the National Assembly signs off on them, but the reality of late is that they aren't passing any bills and the Assembly remains log-jammed over the so-called ferry bill. Now, internal discord within the main opposition party threatens to further complicate matters. Our Choi Yoo-sun has this next story.
Still deadlocked 2 weeks into the regular parliamentary session, the floor leaders of the ruling and opposition parties have agreed to seek by next week a compromise on the contested bill that will set up a probe into April's ferry disaster. After first reaching a bipartisan agreement on the bill, the opposition has since backtracked, insisting that ferry victims' families have a greater voice in the investigation process.
For us to move forward in our negotiations, the opposition needs to clearly state its position on the bill.
But internal discord within the main opposition party has emerged as another obstacle. Nominations made by the party floor leader for co-chairs of the Reform Committee and its interim leadership have been met with resistance from within the party. One of those proposed is Chungang University professor Lee Sang-don, who has led reforms of the conservative ruling party in the past.
I settled on a progressive and reform-minded conservative figure for co-chair.
Another nominee is Seoul National University professor An Kyung-hwan, who was the reform advisor to the previous opposition presidential candidate. With a long list of pending economy and reform-related bills, the ruling party, which has a majority in the assembly, is now considering unilaterally getting parliament back in business. The ruling side has been pressuring National Assembly Speaker Chung Hee-hwa to exercise his authority to call a voting session with or without the opposition. Seeking to break the impasse, the Speaker on Friday asked each standing committee chair for their cooperation to get the parliament running again. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News.
Over in New York, the 69th UN General Assembly will convene next Tuesday at UN headquarters. The general debate will open a week later along with a UN Security Council summit hosted by U.S. President Barack Obama. Many topics will be on the summit table, including the growing threat of Islamic State militants and North Korea's human rights violations. President Park Geun-hye will be among the leaders giving speeches at the General Assembly. Her keynote address on the 24th will center around seeking international support for her vision of a peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Soo-yong is scheduled to give a speech which will mark the first ministerial-level address by the North in 15 years. Meanwhile, a senior North Korean diplomat reportedly held talks with Europe's chief envoy on human rights. Radio Free Asia reports that Kang Seok-ju, Pyongyang's Secretary for International Affairs, met with Stavros Lambrinidis, the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, sometime this week. During the talks, Lambrinidis reportedly expressed grave concerns about North Korea's dire human rights situation. Kang is currently on a 5-nation tour that includes stops in Germany, Belgium, and Switzerland, and Lambrinidis is said to be the only EU official to have met with Kang.
1 week before Scotland votes on whether to break away from the United Kingdom, hundreds of thousands of Catalonians in Spain poured into the streets on Thursday, calling for their own secession from Spain. Separatists in the autonomous community said they were committed to holding a referendum on November 9th, the day that Catalonia had become a province of the Spanish crown 300 years ago. The poll would be regarded as illegal by the Spanish government and will likely be blocked by the country's constitutional court. And in the Middle East, 10 Arab nations pledged to join Washington's fight against Islamic State militants. Retired U.S. Marine General John Allen is said to be coordinating the efforts in Syria and Iraq. Our Kwon So-hwa has this report.
President Obama's broad coalition of U.S. allies to counter Islamic State militants is gradually taking shape. 10 Arab nations, including Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Egypt, and Lebanon, have vowed to support the international coalition, which aims to ultimately destroy the extremist group. This pledge came on Thursday at a meeting of the nation's foreign ministers and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in the Saudi coastal city of Jeddah. Kerry stressed the critical role Arab nations play in the joint communique. They will have to provide military support, humanitarian aid, and ensure the flow of funds and foreign fighters to IS is cut off.
And certainly the effort to repudiate once and for all the dangerous, the offensive, the insulting distortion of Islam that ISIL propaganda attempts to spread throughout the region and the world.
Kerry also dismissed Russia's questioning of the legality of the coalition without prior UN Security Council authorization. He said that if the situation wasn't so serious in Ukraine, it would be amusing to think about Moscow raising the issue of international law. Washington's European allies have been offering their own forms of support. Germany says it's happy to provide weapons and ammunition. Britain and France have not ruled out joining U.S.-led military action in Iraq, but are wary about joining potential operations against IS positions in Syria. Here in Korea, Seoul's foreign ministry reiterated Thursday that an aid package worth $1.2 million will be sent to help Iraqis displaced by the crisis. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Korea's central bank held its key interest rate steady at 2.25% for this month. It was a widely expected move after the bank cut the rate by 25 basis points in August, but expectations are mounting over another cut in the next couple of months. Our Hwang Ji-e has more.
The Bank of Korea has chosen to take a wait-and-see approach over the impact of last month's rate cut. It decided to leave the key rate steady at 2.25% in September during its monthly monetary policy meeting on Friday. The bank said although consumer spending is showing signs of picking up after being hit hard by the ferry disaster in April, the nation's business sentiment remains sluggish. The central bank governor, however, dismissed concerns that the Korean economy is headed for deflation.
Korea's expected inflation rate is running in the 2% range, and considering that, it's hard to say the economy is under deflationary pressure.
Experts say the bank could lower the rate once more before the year is out. They cite the domestic economy's still feeble pace of recovery, despite recent government stimulus measures and the central bank's rate cut that was intended to prop up growth. But another cut, they say, may not cut it.
The weak pace of recovery stems from the nation's structural problems, not because there aren't much changes in the key rate or government stimulus measures. So even if the bank lowers the rate, it likely won't have a major impact.
The central bank is also under growing pressure from the government to join efforts aimed at boosting growth. The government has been expressing concerns that the Korean economy might fall into Japan-style stagnation. Experts add, though, that the Federal Reserve's earlier than expected decision to raise its key interest rate due to the strengthening U.S. economy could be another variable down the road. Hwang Ji-e, Arirang News.
And it's not just experts saying the pace of Korea's economic recovery is weak. The finance ministry says the domestic recovery is still sputtering along, but the overall outlook for the economy remains positive. Our Kim Min-ji has this report.
The Korean government says the nation's economic recovery remains sluggish. In its monthly Green Book report released Friday, the finance ministry said the domestic economy is showing signs of improvement amid stabilizing prices and employment, but that the pace of recovery remains weak. Experts say the current economic environment is holding back consumption.
Domestic demand is improving, but the recovery is weak. There are many factors that are negatively affecting spending, such as household debt. The current conditions aren't such that we should expect a boost in domestic consumption.
However, in contrast to the previous reports, the overall assessment of the economy is positive. The book said the economy created over 500,000 jobs in July from a year earlier, and consumer prices rose 1.4% in August on year, remaining in the 1% range. Production in the mining and manufacture sectors also rose for the second straight month in July. The report did add that investment sentiment and domestic consumption have yet to show signs of stabilization. It also cited the tapering of stimulus measures in the U.S. and political instability in the Middle East as external risk factors that could affect the nation's economy. The ministry said it will carefully monitor domestic and international economic trends and institute preemptive measures if necessary. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
So the overall economic recovery may be weak, but this year's extended 5-day Chuseok holiday, which ended this past Wednesday, proved to be an economic boon for domestic retailers. According to E-Mart, the country's largest retailer, sales jumped nearly 5% compared to Chuseok holiday of 2013 and by more than 10% compared to the year before that. It's not just the retailers that enjoyed a boost. Lotte department store says sales spiked more than 84% this Chuseok from the figures in 2011. This year's holiday was the first since the so-called substitute holiday system was implemented, where Koreans got an extra day off of work because part of it fell on the weekend. Korea's jobless rate edged down 0.1 percentage point on month to 3.3% in August. This as the nation's manufacturing and service sectors picked up momentum after a sluggish start to the summer. The number of new jobs went up for the second straight month, reaching nearly 26 million last month. That's roughly 600,000 more than the same month last year. More positions opened up in the manufacturing, retail and service fields, but job creation was down in the financial, agricultural and fisheries sector. Korean students often jump at the chance to study abroad as it adds to their competitiveness in the local job market, according to some, and also makes them more appealing in the globalized world we live in. But our Connie Kim says the global education they seek may be right under their noses.
Get all the benefits of studying abroad without ever having to leave Korea. 2 additional foreign universities have opened at the Incheon Global Campus in Korea's western port city. It's part of the Incheon Free Economic Zone's plan to house competitive universities from around the world. Utah University and Belgium's Ghent University began classes earlier this month. They joined State University of New York and George Mason University. Studying the same curriculum, receiving the same diploma, and having the opportunity to study at their foreign university's main campus for one school year is what's luring an increasing number of Korean students.
It's a unique experience where students get to interact with exchange students from the main campus, and we're able to study with actual professors from the main campus that are actually well experienced and very knowledgeable.
The strategy came about in part because Seoul sends more students to the U.S. than any other city in the world. Data shows more than 56,000 students from the Korean capital went to the U.S. to study for degrees between 2008 and 2013. But will the Incheon Global Campus be able to stem the flow of young Korean talent leaving the country for their further education?
The Songdo Global Campus offers students a diverse set of unique experiences, but pundits say it still has a number of challenges to address before it can ascend the ranks among would-be college students.
In order to retain talented Korean students, the key is to bring in universities with high name value. As of now, not many of the schools in Songdo are world-class universities. It's also important to balance out the proportion of foreign and local students.
The Incheon Global Campus wants to increase the number of global universities from 4 to 10 by 2025. School officials say their future success will ultimately depend on the quality of institutions they're able to attract. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Well, speaking of attracting people from around the world, Korea was a popular destination for Hollywood stars promoting their latest films last year. But this year, it has been rather quiet.
Right, the A-listers have turned their backs on Seoul and made a beeline towards China's biggest cities for the red carpet treatment. They are going far east, and our Park Ji-won explains why.
From Tom Cruise in January and Robert Downey Jr. 3 months later to promote Iron Man 3, to Will Smith the following month, and then Brad Pitt, Tilda Swinton and Chris Evans in the summer. The list of Hollywood actors making stops in Korea last year was long and star-studded. But this year's list is much shorter. Jackie Chan came in January to promote his Police Story sequel, and Megan Fox visited in August. But beyond them, Korea's red carpet hasn't been graced by many Hollywood stars in 2014. That's because more of them are choosing China to promote their new films in the Asian market. Nicole Kidman, Hugh Grant, John Cusack, and Natalie Portman have all visited China this year.
Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, China is actively trying to open itself up in the realm of culture and is now much more accepting of Western cultures. This is leading more Hollywood stars to visit the huge Chinese market as they eye commercial success.
In terms of box office revenue, China raked in some $3.6 billion last year, making it the world's second largest behind North America. This year, the fourth installment of the Transformers series was a global hit with $1 billion box office revenue worldwide. About $160 million of that came from the Chinese market. It's a market that's expected to continue growing, which means the long line of Hollywood stars heading to China is expected to grow even longer in the years to come. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
It's time for weather. That means we turn to our Michelle Park standing by at the Weather Center.
It was a nice day here in Seoul, but some other regions didn't really get much sunshine.
That's right, and just moments ago it started to drizzle here in the capital as well, which won't last too long, but the northeastern provinces of Gangwon-do is expecting more sporadic showers overnight, and it goes similar story for the areas of both Chungcheong provinces, which can expect around 5 millimeters. And tomorrow, similar conditions are forecast in the central region with clear sunny skies and slightly higher daytime highs. However, the southern regions will be a bit cooler under mostly cloudy conditions. And the nights will be cooler nationwide, which is typical for this time of the year. We're looking at temperature gaps of about 10 degrees on average, so be sure to layer up if you are having outdoor plans. Now going over to our tomorrow's readings. Seoul will start off the Saturday morning at 18 before reaching up to 29 degrees in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will see the highs of 27 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island peaks over to 26, while Dokdo hits 22, while Mankungang is cooler at 23. Now that's all for Korea. Now here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that does it for this edition of our newscast. Thank you for watching. To those in different time zones, have a good day. This has been Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy, wishing our viewers wherever you are a wonderful, fruitful weekend. Kyung-kyung and I will be back same time on Monday.